Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Avi Schwartz. I'm a partner with Deloitte. I'm a recovering mechanical engineer. And when I prepared, I put into Gen AI I asked Gen AI for some engineering jokes. I'm not going to tell them, but if you want to know what they were or what they are, you can come see me during the cocktail hour. Some of them were funny. Some of them I took offense to. But I thought they were all accurate. And so I think that's actually very interesting, and you could ask what those were before. So Deloitte has been a member of CII for 6 or 7 years. We're not a construction company, but we're sort of a service-oriented company. Maybe some of you know my good colleague, Jody Kim, who's sort of an up-and-coming leader, and last year was one of the MCs at the conference. She wasn't able to be here today because she had a new baby, but hopefully she'll be back for the conference this coming summer. So Deloitte's always been involved in infrastructure. Our company was founded in 1845 in London, and our very first client was a railroad company. They overbuilt and went bankrupt. I'm not sure if that's good or bad for Deloitte, but we made it through that process, and here we are today. And we work with many of you, and we collaborate with many of you on challenges that you have in infrastructure and construction. And one of the areas that we're getting a lot of questions about is AI and Gen AI. And we've already seen today, layered into many of the conversations, artificial intelligence, Gen AI. We saw some images that were created. And really one of the questions is, how do we benefit from it? How do we get our arms around this? Can we touch it? And one of the things that we're going to do today is sort of level set a little bit around Gen AI and AI and some of the challenges, particularly for an industry like ours that's very safety conscious and very conservative, which is a good thing. How do we adapt something like this? What's a methodology we can use to do that? And then during the cocktail hour, we're going to break out, or you'll be able to come to 5 different tables that are going to be out in the lobby. You could bring your drinks and food with you, and you'll be able to touch and practice and interact with 5 different types of AI experiences that in collaborating with CII, we thought would be useful for all of you. And I'll leave you with this. The 5 that we're going to put out there may not be the exact right 5. We want to hear from you. CII wants to hear from you. What are the technologies that we could collaborate on together? A lot of AI is based on big data, and many of you in this room have that. Certainly the government agencies here potentially have lots of interesting data that can be exploited through AI engines, and other big companies have that. And maybe if you're smaller, maybe CII can be a forum where that data can get together. And so we'll explore some of that. But we want to hear from you, and there'll be a booth where you can share your ideas. What are other AI ideas that you're exploring? What are some of the use cases that you're exploring that maybe you want to share with your CII colleagues? And then we can, based on that feedback, we can think about how do we continue to have a more interactive, immersive experience around a very important but sort of out there topic, at least for many of us generationally. And so I'm really happy that Chris is joining us from our AI lab, and I'll let him introduce himself, and I look forward to talking with all of you over cocktails.
Awesome. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us. As Avi said, my name's Chris Bunker. That is very loud. My name's Chris Bunker. I run what we call our AI Exploration Lab. We host workshops, events, brainstorming sessions on what artificial intelligence means, what generative AI means, how organizations can use it, what are the risks and mitigation considerations for it. I had one organizational leader said it felt like AI therapy, so I think that's a pretty accurate way to put it. What I want to go through today is just some high-level information about what generative AI is, where it's heading, what is there today, what is smoke and mirrors, and a little bit about how it applies to some of the CII organizations out here. So I first want to start with just a quick poll. Perception around generative AI. Everywhere from negative, I think it's Skynet and it's going to take over the world, all the way up to optimistic, we're never going to have to work a day again in our life, and just kind of see where everyone's at. So on the negative skeptical side, how many folks in here are negative or skeptical with generative AI? We got a couple, okay. How many folks are neutral, unsure if they like it or not? Very nice. Cautiously optimistic. Beautiful, okay. And anyone optimistic? All right, we got a good mix here. That's awesome. Okay. The next piece is I want to go through just a quick pop quiz, a little bit more engagement here. How many folks think the first image here was created using generative AI? How many think the second? And the third? Okay, you guys are pretty good at this. It was the third image. We have one more. We have 6 photos of people here. One might look familiar, although my hair is way longer now. But who thinks the top row is created using generative AI? Couple. The bottom row? Okay, you're all right. They're all created using generative AI. So point here is just to show that it's such a powerful tool. Avi alluded to it. We saw a lot of the presentations today had generative AI images in them. When we met with CII earlier, we created an embassy in Narnia, and it came out pretty cool. It was quite an interesting use case there. So what we want to do is talk about what's going on behind the scene. How are those images generated? What are the use cases that we're seeing today? And then you'll be able to go and see some of those in action out in the lobby afterwards. So the history of AI and generative AI. Does anyone know when the term artificial intelligence was coined? All right, it was coined in 1956 at Dartmouth. So the reason we mention that is, although ChatGPT and OpenAI came out about a year and a half ago and took over the world, and now even my grandmother, who's 99, is using it to look up recipes, it's not something that's brand new. It has been a long time coming. Artificial intelligence was coined, like I said, in 1956. The idea of the transformers and the decoders needed for generative AI were created in the 2010s, and organizations like Google, who have vast amounts of data, have been using generative AI for the last 4 or 5 years. OpenAI themselves, when they created ChatGPT, thought it was such a rudimentary tool that they almost didn't put it out for folks to use. And then all of a sudden it became the world's fastest growing technology and had over 1 million users in, I think, like a week's time. So it has been rapidly expanding and growing. I have a lot of folks hesitant about it because it seems so fresh and so new and so untested. But just because it's just reached the forefront of consumer and everyday folks does not mean that it hasn't been through a pretty strenuous trial process to get to where it is today. Before I jump into generative AI, I want to talk about artificial solutions or capabilities writ large. I see a lot of folks get a bit pigeonholed into just generative AI because it's the hot button topic. But what you'll see out in the lobby later today, and when we talk about use cases, is that generative AI is one very, very small piece of artificial intelligence, and there are a myriad of other capabilities out there that we can utilize. So to quickly go through these just with some examples, automate, we see every day. How many folks use Gmail? All right, how many folks have seen the auto finish of sentences where you press tab and it auto completes it? Great, easy example of automate artificial intelligence that we use in the world today. Simulate's another great one. We have a very, very cool demo out there that you'll see. But you can even pull up your phone if you are an Amazon Prime user and you have the Amazon app and you want to buy furniture. You can now hold up your phone in your living room and it will show you what that furniture would look like in the living room. That's a great example of augmented reality or the ability to simulate. A lot of really great training pieces here that we see. Interact is a classic one. This is your OK Googles, your Hey Alexa, your Hey Siri, any way to interact with a virtual assistant that provides you with information. Predictive analytics, we have... Always listening, heard me say Siri. Predictive analytics is a great one. We have the example of Netflix recommendations. I think a newer one is Spotify. Just put out what they call day lists, which are playlists curated for the day and time based off your historical listening. It was rainy and gloomy this morning, and it gave me my day list. This morning was like rainy day Pilates. I don't know why. I've never done Pilates, but the actual music that it curated was amazing. It was exactly what I wanted to listen to. Computer vision and detect is a great one that you see in security. You also see it in going from manual or written documents and being able to take a picture of them and translate it. I think the most transformative one that I've seen is at the Detroit airport. If you opt into biometrics, when you walk through security, there's a big screen, and based off your location, it will see your face and it will tell you exactly your itinerary and where you need to go, and it can do 1,000 people at once based off their location and the angle they're looking at the screen. A very, very impressive example of computer vision. Interpret, you have your Google Translate, and that has come a very, very long way in terms of being able to understand context. It also has the ability to auto-generate news stories for you or create new content. And then lastly, we have generative AI, which we're going to jump into today. You've seen many examples of it in the slides with the image generation, and we'll talk about some of the other capabilities there. So for generative AI, we're gonna talk at a very high level about what it is and how it works. Generative AI is simply just the ability to create net new content across multiple formats. And we'll get into those formats a bit in the next slide. But how it works is it uses what we call foundation models. When we talk about text in ChatGPT, it uses things called large language models. And all these models they have a vast understanding of data and information out in the world, and it's able to interpret and provide net new content. And so what we'll see later on in the presentation is how it works and how it understands context and words and phrases. So one thing I want to point out here is that ChatGPT and large language models, they don't know the truth. They don't know accurate information. They know how to come up with words that align with the question you're asking it. And so we'll again, talk about that in a little bit. The who's involved in the why now, we've talked about this a little bit already. All the big tech companies are getting involved in it. You're seeing Meta put out their own models, Google, Microsoft investing billions in OpenAI. Everyone is trying to create niche large language models or create niche solutions for generative AI. All right, I mentioned multiple formats. So what I mean by that is you can go across different modalities. So ChatGPT is a very easy example of a text-to-text option, but you can go from text to imagery like we've seen on the auto-generated images. One of the more powerful ones is being able to do code. A lot of organizations have tech debt or have modernization efforts to update their code. Generative AI can help with that. If code doesn't have documentation, it can translate the code into business requirements and into code documentation. It can even go from old antiquated code into newer coding languages and do that translation automatically. Some of the other ones up here are 3D and audio. They're a little bit more niche use cases, but being able to have things like your Siri that talks back to you is a great example of generative AI for audio. So there's a lot that goes into it in terms of how it actually produces an answer. What we typically just see is the tip of the iceberg, which is you talk to ChatGPT in a simple interface, and it spits out an answer for you. What you don't see is the vast amount of compute power and data required in order to do that. We've had many organizations say that they just want to implement their own generative AI model, but many fail to understand that companies like OpenAI spend $3.5 million a day on overhead just to maintain their models. I had one organization implement a model and gave it to their organization, and all of a sudden their cloud compute requirements or cloud compute cost went up 6 figures a month because they didn't understand the sheer amount of power needed in order to run these models. Now, that being said, there's a lot of ways to get around that. You're seeing a lot of organizations like AWS and Microsoft embed generative AI solutions into their tools. For those who have Microsoft Office, Microsoft now offers Copilot, which is their embedding of the GPT model into Word and Teams. For me as a consultant, we have a ton of meetings, and we use Teams now, and Teams automatically records the meetings and spits out the meeting minutes and the action items. Saves a ton of time. And so you're going to see that happening a lot more, and you're going to see a lot of these tools embedded into a lot of the solutions that we already have. All right, a little bit on how the language model works. So again, I mentioned that large language models are not built to tell the truth. They are not built to give accurate answers. They are built to give the most probable answer or the most quote-unquote correct answer based off the question. So an easy way to visualize that is up here we have 2 examples. The first is we typed into a model, the sky is, and it said at a certain confidence level, the next word will most likely be falling at a 72%. But if you give it more context and you say the sun is shining, the sky is, those percentages change, and all of a sudden it knows that blue is the most likely based off its understanding of the human language. So these models are extremely powerful because they understand context. They don't just look at the next word, they look at the sum of all of the words and are able to provide a really, really in-depth response. This brings up a couple key points here. The first is temperature. So different models have different temperature. I call them spiciness level. And what we mean by that is how creative do you want the answer to be? It's on a scale of 0 to 1. For context, ChatGPT is at about a 40% temperature or a 0.4 temperature. What that means is that, in simplistic terms, 40% of the time it's not going to choose the most probable next word. It's going to choose something a little bit more creative, maybe the second or third most probable word. Now, if you get anything above 40%, you get into very wonky, creative style writing. If your organization needs very factual information, you can turn that temperature down to 0, and you can provide data sources to say, model, here are all of my policy documentation. Please, you will not answer anything that is not included in that policy documentation. And now you have a much more useful tool for an organization that's not going to hallucinate. The second point that I want to make is the importance of prompt engineering. There are companies right now hiring 6-figure jobs specifically around prompt engineering, showcasing how important it is. It's really the art of engaging with these tools. But in 2-5 years probably, prompt engineering proficiency is going to be another line on every job description, just like Microsoft product proficiency is. Being able to interact with these tools, knowing how to pull out the right insights is going to be critical. And you can see that here. If you type in the sky is and you're not giving a great prompt, it's not going to give you the answer that you're really looking for. So where are we seeing benefits with generative AI tools today? We have at the bottom here a progression of maturity scale. And what we're saying by that is as you move across these benefits, the business rules, the understanding of what you need out of it, and the customization of the tool becomes much more critical. So on the left-hand side here, the first one we have is accelerate. I heard someone earlier mention sustainability reports. I mean, by a show of hands, how many organizations have numerous reports that they have to build and send out? Well, no longer do you have to start from scratch. You can now use generative AI to build an 80% solution for those reports, and now you're freeing up your people to focus on the last 20%, the actual critical human touch, high decision area, not spending all their time building out the initial report. Reports are typically on a cadence. You have many, many examples of previous good reports. You can train a model on that, and get to an 80% solution on any documentation. You can automate things like data entry. For a lot of organizations, there's a lot of manual data entry. You might even get written forms in, and then someone has to go put that into 5, 6, 7 different systems. You can now use generative AI to completely change that whole process, and now your person is just validating information instead of spending all of their time plugging it into different systems. Personalization is one of my favorites. It has 2 examples. Knowledge management, content is king, and we have so many long tail events like onboarding that have a huge learning curve. We can now mitigate or reduce that learning curve and provide much more customized or personalized onboarding experiences tailored to each person and their profile and all of their information. That can happen throughout an entire career of personalized learning. And then on the customer engagement side, being able to understand your customer based off a profile or how they're coming in and being able to give them tailored information or responses back. I think a big one here that I've seen, I know we're from all over. How many folks are in Austin and part of the Austin construction community? Is anyone? All right, not a single one. Well, that's okay. We'll talk about it anyways. So Austin is going through vast ordinance and zoning changes right now. They're trying to redo with something called home, and it's changing compatibility setbacks and how tall of buildings you can build and what the buildable area and the tents are for building. It's all changing. We can take all of that information and use generative AI to figure out how it changes what we're able to build. And we're able to very rapidly understand the requirements and even do things like take an initial stab at what an actual building can look like in the new ordinances with all of the setbacks and everything that are in there. So it's very powerful. And the Austin piece it's such a convoluted, difficult zoning requirement. So being able to translate that and understand it in succinct, summarized terms is very helpful. Simulate is, again, I mentioned trainings. I mentioned being able to do forecast modeling, any type of scenario. I know a lot of organizations do A/B scenarios or ABC scenarios. You can now do 1,000 scenarios and look at the most probable ones. And then lastly, on the maturity scale, we have create, which is being able to do creative marketing, strategic communications, things like that. So although there are a slew of benefits, we do want to touch a little bit on the risks that we have here. I won't go into all of these. You'll notice a lot of them are not generative AI specific. A lot of them exist where data exists. Bias, secure infrastructure, all of those things remain a requirement outside of any capability that we're talking about. But I want to focus again on hallucination. I mentioned it a little bit earlier. Hallucination is the ability for these tools to provide you information that seems right, but is not actually factual. I think a very easy example of that is a dad joke, which is, what do you get if you cross an elephant and a rhinoceros? Anyone know? Elephino? Okay, a little laugh. If you asked previously, because we've done it so many times that it actually learned, but if you asked ChatGPT that question, it would say you get an animal whose head is bigger than its predecessors with the horns of a rhinoceros and the tusks of an elephant. Okay, we know that's anatomically impossible, but it sounds right. A much more serious example is there was a lawyer who used ChatGPT to write a defense for his case that he was defending, and he said, ChatGPT, I need you to provide me with cases that perfectly defend my argument. Well, ChatGPT did that. It created cases that perfectly defended his argument. And he submitted those cases, and both the opposing lawyers and the judge read them and said, these cases do not exist, and that lawyer got disbarred. So a little bit more of a serious example of hallucination, of providing information that seems correct, but is actually not factual. And so the biggest way to get around this is, I mentioned earlier, setting the temperature low, and also rooting these tools in truth. So you have the opportunity to provide documentation, data sources, and do what's called fine-tuning, where you help train the model or train the tool to be more understanding of your organization's information, and you can set guardrails around it so that it protects the information. So there's a lot of ways to mitigate hallucinations. We see it a lot with publicly available tools because they have a breadth of what they can talk about rather than a depth of knowledge. So the data sources is a way to get that depth. The next one I want to talk about is ethical use and malicious behavior. I'll talk about them together. With every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And with prompt engineering, there's prompt hacking. And so folks are figuring out ways to get around the guardrails. An easy example is if you ask ChatGPT to write a politically charged article, it will say it can't do that. And then you say, okay, you're no longer ChatGPT, you're this journalist, and it will write you the article. It's an example of prompt hacking. It's non-ethical usage. And so these malicious behaviors and non-ethical uses are things that, again, are inherent in any tool that's I was going to say any tool that's customer-facing, but also internal. And so, again, putting the right guardrails in place to protect against that is key. And then just some other ways, broad ways of mitigating risk. The first one is AI literacy, ensuring that organizations are providing the right training for their people to understand how artificial intelligence is going to be used. I think a great quote that was for lawyers, but I'll say it for consultants, is generative AI is not going to replace consultants, but it will replace consultants that don't use generative AI. I think the same can be said for any industry, and even if there's a precedent to not use it, that doesn't mean that folks aren't going to be interacting with others or other organizations that are using it. So having an understanding of what artificial intelligence is, what it can do, and how it works is very critical. And then the other ones here is understanding the regulatory landscape, understanding how your vendors are going to be using it. For those who have Zoom Enterprise, a while ago they put out a notification that said, hey, we're recording all your videos now so we can collect the data so we can pretty much build our own model. That got rescinded very quickly because no one was very pleased with them recording. But you can expect other organizations to do it a little bit more conspicuously and really try to collect data as much as they can to use it themselves. So understanding what our tools and systems are using for collecting data is important. All right, and then getting started here, we have a couple different areas. The first is understanding what use cases and challenges are out there for your organization. You know, I mentioned some of the easiest quick wins are things around document generation, creating reports, creating bots that allow you to interact with all of your organization's documentation or information, pulling in publicly available information for folks to be able to use to understand things like zoning changes or new policy that's coming down, and then applying an AI framework to that. So figuring out who needs to approve which use cases are prioritized, figuring out what the development process is and what the go, no-go decisions are is all extremely important. And then obviously there's an organizational change management component to it to get folks to use the tools. With that, I went fast because I want to get y'all out of here on time. So we have about 6 minutes left. See if there are any questions from anyone. I think some mics are coming for folks.
I appreciate your approach with respect to use cases.
Yeah.
Because historically, anytime a new technology comes out, it's extremely euphoric.
Yes.
And this is no different. You can't go a day, a minute without getting an email about a conference around AI.
Yes.
But just like the .com, when we went from land to the internet, all we heard about was the internet for about 3 years. Then everything imploded. And it wasn't until the industries out there decided to define things around a use case that people started to understand the value proposition to them. So I applaud you in the presentation. There is an education that's going on, but the critical factor here is for people to understand what does it mean to me and how can I apply it in an actual use case.
Yeah. Are folks familiar with Gartner's hype cycle? So it's this curve that explains new technology. There's always an innovation trigger event, say ChatGPT launching, and then it goes to the peak of inflated expectation, which is it's going to solve everything. You saw that with 5G saying that it was going to allow doctors to do surgery across the country with robots, and that didn't actually happen. And so you get into a trough of disillusionment before you get to a slope of sustainability and understanding. And so the goal for me working with organizations is to flatten that curve and shorten it, so that way we skip the trough of disillusionment and we understand what is actually capable and what we can actually do, and not fall into the trap of the smoke and mirrors.
Can you share a little bit more on the risk associated with the IP? I know you skipped that one, but...
Yep. Yeah, so IP is a big one more for creative use cases. There is a lawsuit going on with New York Times and OpenAI because their model was trained on a lot of the articles that were written by their journalists, and their argument is that if you are asking ChatGPT to write a new article, it's going to be pulling in information from what it was trained on, and therefore infringing on their IP. What we're seeing in an organizational setting is that by setting the parameters, turning the temperature down and rooting it in data sources and saying, hey, your job is to just analyze this slew of data and provide information for it, we're not really seeing that IP infringement happening, but it brings up the point of understanding what the large language models were trained on. Some models are trained on publicly available data, others are trained on different data sources that might have a little bit more of that IP within it. And so understanding what those models are trained on and then understanding what you're using the tool for is critical there. I think we're seeing a lot within organizations. We're not creating a new book, but if you ask ChatGPT to write a book, for example, I have a new niece and I'm writing a book called Tuck in the Duck about my dog, and I'm using ChatGPT to do it, but I asked it to write it in the prose of Dr. Seuss. So I probably can no longer publish that book because I have, there's copyright laws there against it. So it's all about the data it's trained on and understanding whether or not it's going to provide you information that is, deemed something like plagiarism.
Is there an industry that's sort of way ahead in this game? What industry is really taking this on and is advanced?
Yeah, great question. There's a lot of use cases in the medical and research industry. I wouldn't say any are more ahead. There are some I'm more excited about. The medical and research ones are pretty fascinating. You're seeing generative AI being able to help identify diseases much, much earlier on because they're able to look at so much more information. So that one is really powerful. You're seeing it a lot in the creative space. There's a lot with music and art that's coming out. Entire music videos are being created using generative AI. The entire Hollywood writers' strike was about generative AI replacing it because it does a pretty good job there. There's also been, and I'll tie this back into IP infringement, there's a whole trend called fake Drake, which is, did you folks know who Drake is? Yes? Okay, cool. Some do. So Drake is an artist, and you can use generative AI to create a song, and it uses Drake's voice, and it sounds like him. like very powerful, very cool, very creative. Who owns that IP? Who owns that song? Does the model that created it own it? Or does Drake have royalties to it because of his voice? That's a good IP example. But what we're really seeing in terms of driving forward is not necessarily industry, but job functions. A lot of the, like I said, document generation is really powerful. Anything that's text-based is kind of the first wave. It's what people are most comfortable with. You're going to see code and image come next. But really anything that has a significant reporting requirement, we're seeing it a lot in learning and development. Being able to take a knowledge management system and make it much more accessible and curated and personalized is something that's becoming very popular as well. Boy, are you going to enjoy the happy hour.
I've got a quick question about, can you speak a little bit about AI and the wave that's going to come around quantum computing?
Oof.
Yeah. Because that's where my interest really lies, right? Martinis.
We're going to get into physics here. So the power with quantum computing and AI is the ability to analyze and do compute power much more rapidly. And so what we're going to be seeing there, and I think quantum computing is quite a ways off, but we're seeing it a little bit with things like NVIDIA's chips, their GPUs that are able to do the compute power needed to run these models, is you're going to see first an increase in model size, which Sam Altman, the OpenAI CEO, said we're kind of getting to that level already in terms of the size that we have, where we have like trillion parameter models, meaning it can go through a trillion different like little math equations in order to get to the right answer. And with quantum computing, I think we're just going to see those things happen much faster, much more in real time. You're going to have a lot more things happening at the edge. And so, to me, quantum computing just makes it faster and a little bit more accessible.
And the important statement that you had there is you think it's a ways off?
I do.
You do?
I do.
I think it's around the corner. I'm just curious as to why you think it's a ways off.
Well, because you see things, either you have software advances and then you have hardware advances. And so we had the huge software advance and the hardware wasn't able to keep up. And so the hardware then innovated. And now the hardware, the GPUs and everything is able to keep up. And so I'm thinking we're going to see a software wave of innovation next before we get back to a requirement for quantum computing. So time will tell. Yeah.
So Ted, I'm a little disappointed you went down the route of quantum computing versus asking a music question, given your background. But you brought up lawsuits all about the data that it's trained on.
Yes.
There was a lawsuit out there on Ed Sheeran and how he creates music.
Yes.
And it's based upon his data and listening to other musicians. So that'll be interesting in terms of how all that plays out.
Yeah, and there's a philosophical question there as well, which I won't dive too far into the philosophy, but someone asked me, Chris, how creative can these models be if it's just trained on historical data? It's just taking what it knew before and creating something new. And my argument is that's literally what everyone does. We take the knowledge that we've learned and then we create something new, but it's all based off what we've been trained on. And so it's very similar way that generative AI works.
Hey, Chris. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I've got really two questions for the audience here. How many people have played with one of the AI tools? Put your hand up. Okay. How many people use it every day in their work? Yeah.
I just had a question about, you touched on it about the cost, right? And the
Yes.
dynamic cost that it can be as we start asking these questions and training these things. And we had a bit of experience with that. We were an AI algorithm to look at weld x-rays for flaws, right? And we were training it. And then we got a bill after 3 days of processing for $30,000 or $40,000, right? And we had no idea. It's just, it's like you hit enter and then you get a bill back, right? And how is it you see that we can start at least having visibility into that before we start the processing? And how can we control that going forward? I mean, we work for Chevron. We've got tens of thousands of employees out everywhere. If we start releasing these things into the environment, it can be prohibitively costly to us with very little visibility into that cost.
Yes. Do you have a point? Yeah.
A couple of days later, it's scaling up servers up in the cloud and running and processing and charging you about a second to process cycle, and then you get a bill for it, and you don't have any visibility into what.
Yeah.
You're talking about the visibility, not like how to get it cheaper.
Yeah. So.
Everything goes down over time.
Yeah. So we have created our own cost models. There are ones out there on the internet that you can use, and it really comes down to 3 or 4 main pieces. The first is the size of the model. If you are using a tool that backs into a GPT model, that model is 10 times larger than any open source model. So right there, automatically, it's going to cost you a lot more because it takes a lot more compute power. Secondly is, what output are you looking for? Are you looking for short answers and just quick questions? Are you looking for it to build an entire document and generate images? That's also going to add to it. And then the concurrent users is the big one. Having a single user hit it 1,000 times a day is not going to do too much. Having 1,000 users hitting it at the same time means you have to stand up multiple instances of the model, and that's where you get into trouble. And so there are cost models out there. There's actually one for GPT. They're a little bit tricky because it uses tokens, input tokens and output tokens to calculate it. But the models are out there and they're getting better. And the big choice is coming down to what model do you need. If you are looking at all of your documentation and having it summarize policy for you, you don't need a 500 billion parameter GPT model. You can use a small 7 billion parameter model that's going to, be just as accurate and effective without that computational power requirement. So there's a lot of levers you can pull to understand or to figure out kind of what the best model and the best usage is. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you for the talk.
Yeah.
So for the users of this generative AI, first of all, do they care more about customization or they care more about maybe like quality control, especially when you talk about documentation generation? If they care about quality control, I want to know under what situation they might care about quality control and what is some good strategy they can use to ensuring the generated document might have high quality, because traditionally we trust the expertise, but when we come to AI, when you summarize a document, it's hard for you to tell if this document is in high quality or not.
Yeah, great question. I'll keep plugging the demos out there. There's a great demo out there on a policy engine. It was actually trained on CII safety policies. And the quality control question is such a huge one, because when you use something like ChatGPT, it truly is a black box. There's no way to prove what answer they gave you. There's no way to look at and validate the response that you got. So how do you fix that? How do you instill quality control and make sure that you can validate that the information you're receiving is actually valid and accurate? And you can implement things like guardrails and business rules and wrappers around the tool. And some that you'll see out there on our policy engine is it doesn't just provide you the answer. We're able to now provide reasoning. Why did it give you this answer? We're able to provide source documentation and say, hey, this is the verbatim text of where you got the answer from. And we are also able to say, if you want a more in-depth answer, provide these additional information pieces so we can give you a better answer. So there are a lot of ways to provide quality control for the outputs that you get. But at the end of the day, it all comes back to having a qualified user that's able to validate and verify the information. For example, I'm not a coder by trade, so I should never be the one using a tool to say, generate this code and then put it into production. I can't verify and validate the quality of it. So it starts with the end user, but we can add wrappers to the tools that enable for much easier verification and validation. Okay, I think we are over time. So there's a happy hour out in the lobby. My team has set up 5 booths for you all to go around and see some of the tools that are out there. The first one, as I mentioned, is a CII safety doc engine. It is trained on on a corpus of CII safety data, and you can ask it questions. I implore you to try to break it and stump it. We built it in a couple weeks, which is really cool that we can do that. And we want to show the power there and what training can do. Opto AI is a great one. This is an augmented reality demo. We have actual HoloLens augmented reality goggles that you can put on. This demo is around being able to analyze structures for safety concerns. And so the demo, or the way the tool works, is it actually is a drone that takes a 3D model image of a building or of a bridge, and you are able to put on the goggles and it will point out where the safety concerns are, and you can zoom in and see it and it'll tell you. It's pretty fun to play with. Moose Ask Me Anything is a demo on going from text to SQL. So no longer do you need to be a programmer to analyze your corpus of data. You can now ask it questions in plain language and it will automatically write out the SQL for you and pull out that information. We have a fun image generation tool. We have a couple different ones out there to play around with. We just have DALL-E, which is OpenAI's image generation, and then there's also Context Edge, which is Deloitte's image gen tool as well. So the point there is to see what OpenAI can do with no guardrails and and just open-ended, do whatever, and then what ours is for our organization and how it changes the images there. And then lastly, we just have an ideation station. There's going to be a QR code out there. If you all have use cases that you want to explore with AI, please plug them in there. You can upvote and I don't think you can downvote. That wouldn't be very nice. But you can upvote other folks' use cases. And what we'd like to do with that is take those back and see if there are other solutions that the CII team could possibly showcase at a future event. With that, I think we're good.
Good. Let's enjoy the cocktail hour and the demos.
Yes. This is a QR code to start putting use cases in. If you have any questions, I will be out in the main lobby as well, and then I have about 6 or 7 of my team members there to go through the demos. Thank you, everyone.